Hi guys, welcome to Monocure 3D Pro Tips. Today we're going to check out the Anycubic Photon Zero. Now this printer shocked the market when they launched it for under $200 US. Let's check it out. Alright, here we go. It's knife time. Now this printer's been sitting around for a while, so hopefully there's no coronavirus in here. Assembly instructions. They're always pretty good, Anycubic, I have to say, with their instructions. Their English is always understandable. They like to use pictures, which is good, and it's all pretty visuals. I guess this printer is going to be aimed at someone who has potentially never used a resin printer before. The scraper, there's the power pack, and it's an Australian plug, which is always good to see. We've got a USB, which is what we load the files into the printer on. This will be the standard masks and gloves, and that's the after sales card, which Anycubic always put in there. A couple of tools there for helping us level the build plate. A mask, we can use that on the train as well. Now that looks like to me to be the quality control pass stamp, so it's to let you know that it's been checked. Which is always good to see, and of course the resin filters, which always come in handy. They'll go straight down to the print lab. So the lid is in UV yellow, and the build plate and the vat is neatly packed on the inside there. That's quite a good way to do it, actually. I like that. So that's the vat. Now you can see straight away this is obviously a pretty small resin printer. This is the build plate for the Mars, Elegoo Mars, and you can see that it actually does not fit in there, right? So it gives you an idea of the size of this. So this is definitely a small printer. This is probably one of the smallest ones we've had on this channel. You can see the size difference there. It's nice and brushed aluminium, which is always good to see, unlike the Mars where they're anodized. This obviously really helps with the adhesion, and actually interestingly it's a little bit more brushed than normal. You can actually feel the lines there, and you can actually feel that would actually give really good adhesion. So they've come a long way, because when Anycubic first brought out these printers, they were anodized as well, with this same blue anodizing that you've got on the top here. That was on the bottom, and it caused us all sorts of issues as resin manufacturers to try and get the resin to stick to that anodized coating. Actually, that's probably the main reason why we came up with Plate Bond, our adhesion promoter. With this type of thing, you know, Plate Bond isn't 100% necessary, but yeah, the anodizing was the reason we've got it. But anyway, this is not anodized, so it's looking good. Interesting way they've done this. It's loose, which is, I guess, fine. I mean, I'm gonna have to level it anyway. And I do like the tapering here, so they've thought about that a little bit, and that just helps obviously when it comes into the vat and comes out, the resin doesn't just sit on there. The Sonic Mini, for example, comes with a flat top on the top of the build plate, and that's not ideal because the resin just sits there, and it's not until you actually have to remove the build plate and tip it and get the resin off, and it is messy. Whereas if this sat there for an hour or two, it'd all just run off. This is actually some sort of composite material. It's not aluminium. Now they've obviously done that to keep the price down. It has the steps on the inside there. The Sonic plastic vats or composite vats, I'm not a huge fan of them. We had one originally on the Sonic Mini. You remember that I unboxed it and we got the surprise because we thought it was going to be the metal vat, but it was a plastic one. And guess what? It did do what we thought it was going to do. It did crack, which is not ideal. And now we have to try and get a metal vat, and they're hard to come by because I think everyone wants them. This one actually, I have to say, does look a lot better quality than that. It was a transparent, more acrylic type material, where this one is a much more solid plastic. Is it ABS or PETG? Something similar, I'd say. It's certainly a lot tougher than the one that the Sonic Mini had. So I'd be more confident to think that this would last. And also, I haven't heard any issues with this on the internet or in the forums that anyone's saying there's a problem with them. And it's so small, any 5-size flip sheet's going to fit in there, and it looks like a pretty standard setup there. Let's get the printer out now. It's pretty light. I have to say straight away, I'm going to give it probably about a 5 for design. It doesn't look overly, engineered. It's certainly no elfin, in its design. It is literally a black box which surprises me a little bit because I kind of always liked Anycubic's design in the past. I thought that with the original Photon, I thought it had a few nice design features. The Photon S as well. And this one they've kept very basic now. Maybe that's just to keep the price down. I'd say it's probably a lot to do with it. Simple, it's going to do what it needs to do without making it fancy and, as I say, keeping the cost down. So we'll take the bit of plastic off there. Just a quick look around here. Very standard setup. This is a typical way that Anycubic puts their vats in place, this slide method. I'm not a huge fan of that. You just need to make sure that when you remove it, that you lift it up first, just to break any seal that may have happened onto the screen. I have seen people where they've pulled this off without doing that first, and it's ripped the screen off. So you need to be a bit wary of that using this lockdown system. But you know what, it does a job, it's effective. You just need to make sure you don't have those issues when you do it. Standard Z lead screw here. It's not attached to the top. You can see that there's no bearing up there. Again, that's probably to save money. It is locked in this rail here. It's not going to move, but I do like to see that locked in up there if it's possible, but again, they're keeping the cost down. I'd say yeah, in behind there, it's quite hard to see. There's a sensor, basically tell it when it's down to the home position. On that side, it's just a black nothing. We've got the power, very straightforward, the power connector in the back where this would go. And on this side, we have on off. You know, so when I pressed that, I was a bit surprised to see how much that's moving in there. And a USB there for this to go in there to put the print on. It's all pretty straightforward, so let's power it up. We'll turn it on. Okay, so this looks like their standard Photon menu. Print system tools. Tools is going to allow us to move the Z up, which is the first thing that we're going to want to do. So I'm going to make sure it's on 10 and I'm going to go up, and it's going to go up 10 mil at a time. Again, guys making these printers, you've got a home button there, but it'd be really nice if you could include a button that took it to the top. I know that I'm not the only one who would appreciate that. Moving these up 10 millimeters at a time are a little bit boring, to be honest. You've got to be a bit careful when you do this. If you just do it rapidly, it actually remembers, and sometimes you can go up too much and damage it. So hopefully that'll stop. So that's up high enough now. So what we'll do is I'll put the vat in place. It really doesn't matter which way this goes around. We'll put the build plate in here. Now the next thing we need to do is level it. Now in the instructions, I'm pretty sure they'll say to use a piece of paper. If you've watched any of my other videos on this, you'll know that I'm not a fan of the piece of paper method, and that is because it really depends on the thickness of the FEP you're using, and paper can come in different thicknesses. I mean, that is very different thickness to that, you know, straight away. So to me, paper's not the best thing. The best thing is to put the vat in place without any resin in it and use that to do the homing, okay? So then we come here and we press the home button. Now that should take it down to the bottom. Okay, so that's settled now. So I just make sure that that's as straight as I can get it in there. So I just like to hold that in position to make sure it is flat while I do it up, and I'll do the opposite to opposite, and I'd sort of do it quite tight, and then I'll come back and do it another level up when I've got them all tight. So that, and I come back and just give it another turn so it's tight. It doesn't need to be overly tight, just not enough that it's going to move when you're doing any sort of printing. You don't want it to get out of level, you just want it to be there nice and tight. Okay, so now we've got to the home position. I've tightened off those screws. That's all looking good. Now what we need to do is set 0. So set 0, we go back to this menu here, and you can see Z equals 0. We press that, and then we have to hit enter. And it says setting OK, raise the platform now. And you hit enter, and then it's going to bring it back up. So now that's set 0 to the bottom. The next thing we need to do is find a model to print. Okay, so I've sat down at the computer. I have actually installed their latest Photon Workshop version 2.1.2. Now that was on the USB stick. So I just put that on there because I think this is going to be the latest version, and the old version might not even work with this unit or this machine, this printer. First thing we need to do is load a file on. Today we're going to print one of my favorites, the Mono Matrix. Let's just rotate it. This is quite a small build plate. I mean, I'm sure it would have printed the other way around, but I was just a little bit concerned that it may not have fit. So anyway, that looks good there. Standard controls on this software. Obviously the move controls, scale if you want to make it bigger, and layout if you had multiple things here or you want to duplicate. And I'd say that's going to be the slice settings there. Let's just have a quick look over at this side here and have a look what we've got set up. Resin type, if you select that, you've got dental, castable or plant-based. Well, that's talking about, obviously about the Anycubic, but we know our Tuff and our Rapid resin and our Flex resin would work on this no problem. We come down here, layer thickness. Well, I always like to try 0.05. I think it's a good place to start. They've suggested 8 seconds for their basic resin. I'm going to leave it on that and see how it goes. Off time's 1 second. Bottom exposure time is 60 and 3 bottom layers. Now, I'm going to change that. Looking at that build plate, I'm going to be happy with 40 seconds and I'm going to change that to 4. 3 would be okay, but I just like 4 as an even number. Z lifted distance, they've said 6. That's fine. I'm usually 5. Speed 3 millimeters a second, and the Z retract 3. I'm going to leave it there. That's what they had, so we'll leave it there and see how we go. Machine settings we shouldn't need to change. That should be standard. So then we need to come over here. We don't need, if we wanted to use any supports, we don't need to support this model, we'd come over here. Time to slice, so I hit this one over here, the slice. We're not going to put it back there, we're going to put it onto the USB, straight to the USB disk. We'll call it Monomatrix 22 and we'll hit save and we'll watch it slice. That's slicing pretty quickly. And it tells us that it's going to take 30 minutes to print and how much it's going to use in the way of resin, which is pretty handy. Hit OK. Let's put the USB stick in. Now be able to go back to the main menu, the print menu, and we should see it here. So that's the one that came with it. Let's say that's already on the USB and this one's ours here. So if we click that there, you can see that it's given you a preview, which is nice. I'm going to take the build plate off while I fill it with resin just to get me better access rather than having to lift it up again. We have Tuff Grey and, how good's this, a Tuff Sample Grey. So that's a 250ml bottle. Now I think it's very appropriate, being this is a small printer, that we use a small bottle of resin. What do you guys reckon? Get some gloves on. Any resin needs a shake. Especially the pigmented stuff, you always want to give it a good shake. You don't need to overshake it, just enough to mix the pigment back into it. Tip the resin in to the vat. Now we're not going to need a lot because it's not a very big print. Make sure that's nice and tight. You don't want that moving around. And then we come back to our menu here and we should just hit the big triangle or the play button or the start button. So we'll let it do its thing for the next 30 minutes. We'll grab a bite to eat, maybe get some lunch, and we'll come back and we'll see how this thing did. So I'll just quickly run through the tech specs of this machine. It's an LCD-based SLA or an MSLA printer. The light source is a 405 nanometer. The XY resolution is 0.115 millimeters for 854 by 480p. Z resolution is 0.01 millimeters. Layer resolution is 0.01 to 0.2 millimeters. So that's 10 micron to 200 micron. Printing speed is 30 millimeters an hour. Power 30 watts. Materials 405 nanometer UV resin, such as our Rapid and Tuff resin. Machine size 180 millimeters by 195 by 367. And the printing volume is 97 by 54 by 150 millimeters in height. And the whole unit weighs 4.7 kilos. So we just got back from lunch and something a little strange has happened. Now, this isn't exactly what we thought we were going to print. This is definitely not our calibration model. In fact, it looks like the calibration model that was loaded on the printer and a whole lot of them across the whole build plate. Now look, it's not all bad. It's obviously my fault. I have pressed the wrong file when we were down here. I want to investigate this again. And so these are the two files I had. Now I did actually notice when I did this that they weren't named what I named it. I named mine Mono Matrix 22, remember? That did puzzle me a little bit. So I was just going off the pictures. The pictures are quite small, and I didn't actually really pay close attention to what that was. But I've clicked on that one there. Now that must be exactly what's printed there, which is that whole plate of their calibration. So if we go back, let's try and actually find if we can find my print that I loaded on there, which is quite interesting because I can't. We need to go back to the computer and try and find that file. But before we do that, I'm going to take this downstairs because it's going to tell us enough about the resin and the printer and where we need to go in regards to dialing it in. Just at a quick glance, I'm going to say, without cleaning it up, I'm very happy that everything looks like it's there, but I do have to say I feel it's a little bit over-cured, which means we'll need to reduce by, I'm going to say 1 to 2 seconds. I'll probably go 2 to an extreme and then see how it looks from there. Okay, so I've just got back from the print lab. I've given this a little wash in Resin Away, of course. It's actually a lot better detail than I thought when it still had the resin on it. I'm actually really impressed with this. Even though it's not what we wanted to print, the resolution is relatively good, and I probably might consider dropping the exposure down by 1. I just noticed some of the lines in here are filled in, but all in all, that's a pretty good print. We'll take these off now, see if we can get them off and see if my theory about the adhesion to this build plate was right, which it is so far. There you go, you just got to find that weak spot. Now these are all individual little models here. Now we didn't need any plate bond on this, but one thing that I did do, which I've been doing more of recently, is post-curing on the build plate. So that's leaving them on the build plate after I wash them. But I wash them on the build plate, leaving them on the build plate, and then actually putting the whole build plate in the post-curing unit and post-curing it on there. And I really find that that helps keeping these parts flat. Now you could, if you wanted to, put them back in. I didn't do them very long. You could put them back in and re-post-cure them for another, so they probably need at least another 20 to 30 minutes. This being the tough resin, we always recommend at least 30 minutes post-cure. And I'm going to have a quick look on this USB and see if I can work out what's going on with this file and why it wasn't on there. Okay guys, so I'm back in the slicer setting now, and I've worked out where we went wrong earlier. And you know, it's good that I can make the mistakes and then you don't have to. So if we go to this up here, configure in the menu, you can see there it says machine type. That needs to be on Photon Zero, okay? So make sure you do it. And look what's happened to the build plate. The build plate shrunk down. So if you change to the Photon S, the build plate gets bigger. And if you go to the Photon Zero, it gets smaller. So that's more realistic. So interestingly, if we had left it around the other way, it certainly wouldn't have fit on this build plate. So you did need to move it around. So now if we hit slice over here and we go to the USB, you can see straight away that it's got PW0 there as the option. So that's a lot better. So we change that, we'll call it 55 or up to, I think, and we'll hit save. Okay, so 32 minutes with our settings. We can hit OK on that. Now let's see what happens this time. We should get a third option on this screen. And there it is there. So you can see there, it says Mono Matrix 55, which is the one that we want. I'm going to click on that one. Just going to double check to make sure that the build plate's clear and free. Whenever we do a secondary print, it's always a good idea just to double check that there is nothing hard on the FEP sheet, and using a metal scraper like I am at the moment is not always the best idea because it can damage the FEP, but if just be very, very careful. I'm pretty confident there's nothing there. I know that the whole model there printed and there doesn't look to be any debris in the resin, so I'm happy to hit print on this and confidently know that there's not going to be anything in there to cause any issues. So press the start button, watch it go down, we'll put the lid on. We'll have a look at it after it's finished. Okay, let's have a look how we went with the Mono Matrix. It's always hard to tell at this stage exactly how we went. I can tell that it's definitely cured long enough. That bar is there. Is it over cured? I'm not sure. We're going to tell a lot more when we clean it up. So let me go down and clean it up, and then we'll come back and have a look and see. So I've just got back up from the print lab and I've cleaned this up now. You can see that everything's definitely there. It's all printed. It's just slightly over cured. So I'd say we could easily knock off 2 seconds and see down to 5 seconds and see how it goes. The adhesion to the build plate looks fine. There's no lifting or any issues there. This last fin has printed. It's just a little bit bent over. It's a very, very thin fin, but that can happen just in the washing process in the ultrasonic cleaner. But the main parts we look at for the overcuring obviously is this lettering. It's a little bit blown out, I guess you call it, or thicker than it should be. And these areas here are filled in where they shouldn't be. 2 seconds, 1.5 might be enough, but we'll put that on and have another look. But all in all, it's done a good print as expected. Anycubic don't bring out printers that can't do a decent print, and they've proven again with this one, a printer that's under $200 US. It's a neat little printer, and it does what it needs to do. It doesn't have the build volume of the Photon S or the original Photon or the Mars or the standard size resin printer. This is certainly a smaller size. If you were just starting out or you wanted to only print small things, maybe you were just doing rings or small miniatures and this was the only size you really needed, then this would be fine. Maybe you want to try this and then move up to something bigger. So we'll just remove this, see how easily it comes off the build plate. Try and find that. There you go. It wasn't overly stuck. It had good adhesion all around, so happy with that. So there you have it, guys, the Anycubic Photon Zero. Neat little printer that'll end up down in our lab downstairs. We'll continue to do some testing with it. We'll dial it in and get it spot on with our different resins, and we'll add them to the website, so the settings will be there with all our different resins. So if you do thinking about buying one of these, or you have bought one, you can get the settings on our website under the print settings menu. Thanks again for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, but most importantly, remember to keep on 3D printing.